The playground at Jessup Park didn't have much left. The slide had a crack down the middle that someone had covered with a strip of silver tape. The swings were missing 2 seats, leaving empty chains that clanged against the poles when the wind blew. The merry-go-round was rusted solid and hadn't spun since 2019. The whole park sat on a half-acre of dead grass between the Dollar Tree and an abandoned laundromat in Orchard Hill, South Carolina. Population 2,900, the kind of town where the welcome sign was the newest thing in it. It was a Saturday afternoon in September. 3:17 p.m. The air was thick and still, the kind of southern heat that sits on you like a hand and doesn't lift until the sun goes down. Most of the town was indoors. The parking lot at the Dollar Tree was empty except for a maroon minivan with a dented fender and a bumper sticker that said, "Blessed," in letters that were peeling at the edges. On the playground, sitting on the bottom of the broken slide with her knees pulled up and a small pink backpack beside her, was a 7-year-old girl named Wren Elizabeth Cotter. She had brown hair in 2 braids that were coming undone because she'd done them herself that morning. She wore jean shorts with a grass stain on the left knee and a purple t-shirt with a butterfly on it that she'd picked out at Goodwill 3 weeks ago because she said the butterfly looked like it was going somewhere. She had a scrape on her right elbow from falling off the merry-go-round, the one that didn't spin, but she'd tried to climb it anyway because that's what Wren did. She climbed things that didn't work and tried to make them go. Her mother, Nora Beth Cotter, was sitting on the bench 15 feet away, watching her the way mothers watch their children in public, half present, half somewhere else. Carrying a list of things that needed doing and a smaller list of things that could actually get done. Nora was 31 years old, 5'3", thin in a way that wasn't fashion but arithmetic. She had circles under her eyes that concealer couldn't fix, and hands that were dry and cracked from the cleaning solutions she used 6 days a week at the Orchard Hill Motor Lodge, where she worked as a housekeeper for $9.50 an hour. 32 hours a week. No benefits, no sick days, no holidays. At 3:22 p.m., a motorcycle pulled into the parking lot of the Dollar Tree next to the park. Not quietly. The engine was loud and low. The kind of sound that makes the ground hum and the air vibrate and every person within earshot look up whether they want to or not. The bike was black and chrome, heavy, built for distance. The man on it was bigger than the machine. He killed the engine. He dismounted. He pulled off his helmet and hung it on the handlebar, and then he stood there for a moment, rolling his neck, stretching his shoulders, the way a man does when he's been on the road for a long time and his body has forgotten what standing feels like. He was 6'3", 258 pounds, with a shaved head and a beard that was black going silver at the jaw. His vest was leather, worn soft at the shoulders, covered in patches that meant things to people who knew what they meant and looked like warnings to people who didn't. His arms were sleeved in tattoos from wrist to shoulder, skulls and roses and words in script too small to read from a distance. His knuckles were scarred. His boots were heavy. His face was the kind of face that made people cross the street. His road name was Anvil. His real name was Thomas James Ledford. He was 46 years old. He was the road captain of the Greenville chapter and had been riding for 24 years. He had a 7-year-old nephew named Kobe who had Down syndrome. And every Sunday afternoon, Anvil drove to his sister's house in Greer and sat on the floor with Kobe and built Lego sets for 3 hours without speaking, because Kobe didn't need words and Anvil had never been good with them anyway. He had lost his father at 12, a construction worker named Bill Ledford, who fell from a scaffold in 1991 and died on a Wednesday morning in a hospital that smelled like floor wax and sorrow. Anvil had been in the waiting room when they came out. Nobody knelt down to tell him. Nobody got on his level. A doctor in green scrubs looked at his mother and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am." And that was it. Thomas Ledford became a boy without a father in the time it took to say 5 words. He carried that. He carried it the way some men carry things. Not on their faces, but in their hands, in the way they grip too hard, in the way they go quiet in rooms full of noise. He walked toward the Dollar Tree. His path took him past the playground. Yes, past the broken slide and the missing swings and the rusted merry-go-round. Past Nora, who saw him and pulled her purse closer to her body without thinking. Past the park bench and the dead grass. And then he stopped. He stopped because a 7-year-old girl had stepped directly into his path, looked up at him, way up, the way a person looks at a building, and said, "Excuse me, mister, but you have a cut on your hand." Anvil looked down. She was right. Blessed, there was a gash across the base of his left thumb, not deep but raw, bleeding just enough to leave a thin red line running into his palm. He'd caught it on a piece of loose chrome outside of Augusta that morning and hadn't noticed. Or hadn't cared. One or the other. "It's fine," he said. "It's bleeding," Wren said. She said it the way children say things. Without negotiation, without doubt, as a fact that existed independent of his opinion. She unzipped her pink backpack. Inside, among a coloring book with half the pages used, 2 broken crayons, a juice box that was probably warm, and a granola bar wrapper, was a single Band-Aid. It was a small one, the kind made for children's fingers, tan-colored, with a tiny cartoon dinosaur on the pad. It was the only one in the bag. It was, as Anvil would later learn, the only one Wren had. She peeled it open with her small fingers. She reached up, standing on her toes, stretching as high as she could, and pressed it carefully across the cut on his thumb. She smoothed the edges down the way someone had taught her, pressing each side with her index finger, making sure it stuck. "There," she said. "Now it won't get infected." Nora was already on her feet, halfway across the distance between the bench and her daughter, her face a mixture of apology and terror and something else, pride, maybe, buried under the fear. "Wren, honey, come here." "I'm sorry, sir. She does this, she—" "Ma'am," Anvil said. He didn't move. His voice was low and careful, the way you talk near something you don't want to scare. "She's fine. She's more than fine." He looked at the Band-Aid on his thumb, a cartoon dinosaur on a cut that a 7-year-old had decided mattered. He looked at Wren, who was looking up at him with eyes that hadn't learned yet that some people are supposed to be frightening. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," Wren said. "Oh, that was my last one, so be careful." Anvil nodded. He looked at Nora. He looked at the park, the broken slide, the missing swings, the rusted merry-go-round, the dead grass. He looked at the dented minivan with the peeling bumper sticker. He looked at a mother who was holding her daughter's hand and watching him the way the world had taught her to watch men like him, with one foot already pointed toward the exit. He walked into the Dollar Tree. He bought what he'd come for. He walked out. He rode away. But he didn't take the Band-Aid off. He left it on his thumb for 4 days until it fell off on its own, because something about it, the smallness of it, the cartoon dinosaur, the way a child had stood on her toes to reach a stranger's hand, had landed in a place inside his chest that he didn't have a name for. He went back to Orchard Hill the next day. But this part of the story requires the other part first. The part that nobody in that town wanted to talk about. Nora Beth Cotter had been born in Orchard Hill and had never left, not because she loved the town, but because the town wouldn't let her go. She'd married young, 21, to a man named Derek Cotter, who drove trucks for a lumber company and who left when Wren was 2, signing away his parental rights in a courthouse in Columbia with the same pen he'd used to sign the marriage license. He hadn't been heard from since. Nora's mother had died of a stroke in 2020. Her father had died in 2014. Emphysema, 30 years of cigarettes. She had no siblings. She had no family within 200 miles. She had Wren, and she had a job cleaning motel rooms for a man named Clyde Nash Hargett. Clyde was 64 years old. He owned the Orchard Hill Motor Lodge, 24 rooms, a vending machine that took your money half the time, and a swimming pool that hadn't held water in 6 years. He also owned 3 rental houses on the east side of town, the building that housed the barber shop, and a 40-acre parcel outside the town limits that he leased to a solar company for $2,200 a month. He was the wealthiest man in Orchard Hill, which wasn't saying much. But in a town with no money, the man with some of it might as well be king. Clyde was an elder at Orchard Hill Presbyterian. He donated $5,000 to the volunteer fire department every Christmas. He sponsored the Little League team. Their jerseys said Hargett Motor Lodge across the back in red letters. He had a handshake that lasted 2 beats too long, and a smile that showed all his teeth and reached none of the rest of his face. The Orchard Hill Gazette had named him Citizen of the Year in 2022. The plaque hung in the motel lobby next to a photograph of Clyde shaking the mayor's hand. Clyde paid Nora $9.50 an hour. The state minimum wage was $7.25. So on paper it looked generous. It wasn't. He capped her at 32 hours a week, just under the threshold for full-time benefits. He required her to supply her own cleaning products, which cost her between $45 and $60 a month. He required her to be on call on Sundays, which meant she couldn't take a second job. But he rarely actually called her in, which meant she sat at home unpaid, waiting for a phone that didn't ring. He charged her $15 per shift for uniform maintenance, a deduction he took directly from her check for a polo shirt he'd given her once, used, that she washed at home. After deductions, Nora cleared roughly $1,020 a month. Her rent, for a house Clyde also owned, on the east side with a roof that leaked in the back bedroom and a water heater that produced lukewarm water on good days, was $625. That left $395 a month for everything else. Food, gas, Wren's school supplies, the electricity bill that spiked every winter because the house had no insulation. But the money was only part of it. Clyde had a system. He hired women who had no options. Single mothers mostly, yet women without family nearby, women who couldn't afford to leave. He gave them just enough to survive and not enough to escape. He scheduled them in ways that prevented second jobs. He housed them in properties he controlled. He kept them close and kept them quiet and kept them grateful. Because in a town where he owned the motel, the rental houses, and the building the barbershop sat in, saying no to Clyde Nash Hargett meant saying no to the only economy that existed. Delia, 55, who had been cleaning rooms for years. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, 28, with twin boys. A woman named Angel, 43, whose husband was in prison in Colombia. A woman named Patrice, Delia, 55, who had been cleaning rooms for Clyde for 9 years and had never once received a raise, because Clyde said the economy wouldn't allow it, while he cashed a $2,200 solar lease check every month. None of them talked about it. Not to each other. Not to the pastor. Not to the mayor who shook Clyde's hand in the photograph. They carried it in silence, because silence was the only thing that didn't cost them anything. Nora carried it harder than most, because Nora had Ren. And Ren needed things: dentist visits, school clothes, the $4 field trip money that came home in an envelope every month, the $12 pair of shoes from Walmart that Ren was already growing out of. And every time Nora fell short, every time she couldn't cover the electric bill or had to choose between groceries and gas, Clyde was there, offering a small advance, offering to fix the water heater for a fee added to the rent, offering help the way a fisherman offers bait, with a hook hidden inside it. Ren didn't know any of this. Ren knew that the playground was broken and the swings were missing and the merry-go-round didn't spin. She knew her mom worked a lot and was tired a lot and sometimes sat at the kitchen table after Ren went to bed and stared at papers that made her face go flat. But Ren also knew that her backpack had crayons in it and that the butterfly on her shirt was going somewhere and that when a person was bleeding, you gave them a Band-Aid. Even your last one. Especially your last one. If you're watching from Orchard Hill or anywhere in South Carolina, drop your location in the comments right now. And if this story's already sitting on your chest like something heavy and warm and impossible to ignore, hit subscribe. Because what Anvil brought back to that park the next day, and what 300 Hells Angels did in the weeks that followed, is the part nobody saw coming. Not Nora, not Ren, not the man whose name was on the Little League jerseys. Stay right here. Anvil came back to Orchard Hill on Sunday afternoon. He parked in the same lot. He walked to the same playground, as Ren was there. Same slide, same pink backpack, same braids coming undone. Nora was on the same bench. This time Nora didn't pull her purse closer. She recognized him. She recognized the vest. She watched. Anvil walked to the slide. He knelt down, all 6'3", 258 pounds of him, so that he was eye level with Ren. He held out a small paper bag. Ren opened it. Inside was a box of Band-Aids. Not the plain kind, not the cheap kind. A 100-count box of every variety they made for kids. Gave me your last one, Anvil said. Gave me your last one, Anvil said. Figured I owed you a few. Wren looked at the box. She looked at Anvil. She said, You kept the dinosaur one? Still got it, Anvil said. He held up his left hand. The Band-Aid was gone. It had fallen off 2 days ago, but there was a thin white scar where the cut had been. It healed. Because of you. Wren smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't hold anything back. No calculation, no performance. Just a child being happy because the world had done something that made sense. Then Anvil looked at the park, the crack in the slide, the missing swings, the frozen merry-go-round, the dead grass and the broken fence, and the trash can that was overflowing because nobody came to empty it. He looked at Nora. Ma'am, he said, this park, how long has it been like this? Nora hesitated. A few years. Now the town says there's no budget. Who's in charge of that? Nora said the name without thinking, the way you say a name that's been sitting in your mouth for too long. Clyde Hargett. He's on the town recreation board. He decides where the money goes. Anvil didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the park. He looked at the town beyond it. The Dollar Tree. The abandoned laundromat. The motel sign in the distance with the missing bulb. He looked at a place that had been allowed to fall apart by a man who could have fixed it and chose not to. I'll be back, he said. He was back the following Saturday. Not alone. 43 bikers from the Greenville and Columbia chapters rode into Orchard Hill at 7 a.m. with truck beds full of lumber, concrete mix, swing seats, chains, bolts, paint, and a brand new merry-go-round donated by a fabrication shop in Spartanburg, whose owner rode with the club and said he'd build it for the cost of materials. They rebuilt Jessup Park in 9 hours. They poured new concrete footings. They replaced the slide, the whole thing, not a patch, a new one, steel and bright blue. They hung 4 swings with rubber seats and galvanized chains. They installed the merry-go-round, cherry red, smooth spinning, with handles that were sized for small hands. They built 2 new benches. They painted the fence. They planted grass seed and laid sod around the play area and put in a small garden border with marigolds because Anvil's sister had said children like flowers that are bright and hard to kill. Wren watched the entire thing from the bench, clutching her backpack, eyes wide, not speaking, just watching men in leather vests build her a playground. But while the park was going up, something else was happening. As Anvil had made a phone call 4 days earlier, not about swings and slides, but about Clyde Nash Hargett. The call went to Dutch Voss, national president, who called Sharon Oakley, the retired paralegal, who called Terrence Bledsoe, the forensic accountant. The same team, the same process, the same quiet, thorough dismantling of a man who had been hiding in plain sight. They found everything. The wage deductions that violated South Carolina labor law, the uniform fees that had no legal basis, the on-call scheduling designed to prevent second employment, the below-market wages disguised as generosity, the pattern of hiring vulnerable women and housing them in properties he controlled at rents that consumed their income, the recreation board funds that Clyde had redirected from park maintenance to a discretionary account he controlled. $18,600 over 4 years, spent on landscaping for his own properties and improvements to the motel parking lot. A 67-page complaint was filed with the South Carolina Department of Labor, the State Attorney General's Office, and the Orchard Hill Town Council. 4 women, Nora, Patrice, Angel, and Delia, signed affidavits. Not one of them hesitated. Patrice said later that signing felt like exhaling for the first time in 3 years. Clyde Hargett was suspended from the Recreation Board within a week. The motel was inspected by the State Labor Board within 2. And the plaque in the lobby, Citizen of the Year, was removed by the mayor personally, who said he hadn't known and then admitted, when pressed, that he had suspected but hadn't wanted to look. Clyde was charged with 11 counts of wage theft, 4 counts of labor law violations, and 2 counts of misappropriation of public funds. His Little League sponsorship was quietly replaced by a collection taken up by the parents, who raised $1,100 in 4 days. The New Jersey said Orchard Hill across the back. Just the town, nothing else. On the day the park reopened, Anvil sat on one of the new benches and watched Wren climb the new slide. She went down it 14 times in a row. She counted each one out loud. On the 15th, she stopped at the top, looked down at Anvil, and said, "This is the best slide in the whole world." "It's all right," Anvil said. "No," Wren said. "It's the best." Anvil reached into his vest and pulled out a brass coin, and he'd been carrying it for 6 years. Since the day he'd become road captain, since the day Dutch had put it in his hand and said, "This means you're responsible for getting people where they need to go." On one side, the chapter insignia. On the other, one word: family. He held it out to Wren. "This is for you," he said. "Hold on to it." Wren took the coin. She turned it over in her small hands, feeling the weight of it, reading the word with her finger the way children read things. Slowly, tracing each letter. "Family," she said. "That's right." "Are we family?" Anvil looked at Nora, who was standing at the edge of the new playground, with her hand over her mouth and tears running down her face. The first tears she'd allowed herself in longer than she could remember. "Yeah, kid," Anvil said. "We're family." 8 weeks later, Nora Cotter had a new job. Front desk at a hotel in Greenville, 25 minutes away. $16 an hour with benefits and regular hours, and a manager who didn't charge her for the uniform. She'd been connected to the position through a network of club contacts that stretched across the state. The kind of network that doesn't show up on LinkedIn but has never once failed a person it was meant to help. The house on the east side was inspected, and 7 code violations were documented. Nora moved. Not far, just to a rental on Maple Street. 2 bedrooms, a working water heater, and a kitchen with a window that faced east, so the morning light came in while Wren ate her cereal. Wren still went to Jessup Park every Saturday. The slide was still blue. The merry-go-round still spun. The marigolds had bloomed and then faded and then been replaced by pansies that a woman from the garden club had planted one Tuesday morning without telling anyone. Every 3rd Sunday, Anvil rode down from Greenville. He parked in the lot beside the Dollar Tree. He walked to the park. Wren ran to meet him, every time without fail, across the new grass, with her braids flying and her backpack bouncing. And she held up her hand for a high five that Anvil returned with one finger, because his hand was the size of her whole head. They sat on the bench. Sometimes Wren talked. About school, about the butterfly shirt she'd outgrown, about the new book she was reading. Sometimes they just sat together and watched the other children play, and the silence between a 46-year-old biker and a 7-year-old girl was the easiest silence in the world. Wren kept the brass coin in her pink backpack, in the pocket where the last Band-Aid used to be. She checked for it every morning. She held it sometimes, turning it over in her fingers, feeling the letters. Family. Some people change the world with money. Some people change it with power. Some people change it with speeches and campaigns and things that make the evening news. And some people change it with a Band-Aid, a small one, with a cartoon dinosaur on it, given freely, without hesitation, to a stranger who was bleeding. Because a 7-year-old girl looked at the scariest man she'd ever seen and didn't see a scary man. She saw a cut that needed covering. If this story got under your skin, the way that Band-Aid got under Anvil's, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to remember that the smallest thing you do can be the biggest thing that happens to somebody else. Share it with someone who's been climbing broken things and trying to make them go. And remember this: the child who gives her last Band-Aid to a stranger, the man who rides back the next day with 100 more, the 43 people who show up with lumber and paint because a little girl deserves a slide that works. That's the code. That's the road. Now, that's what family means.